TGIF.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, it is Friday. I don't know if I would say this is week 8, week 9, week 10. It's been many, many weeks of many changes going on in business and the economy. And we're going to have such a fun conversation in the next few minutes about what companies are doing to accelerate the data economy. So we'll get started in just a few minutes for anyone joining us. Um, Merav, how are you doing today?
Well, as you said, TGIF. So, just surviving another day in the pandemic, as I like to say.
Oh man. Well, I hope that we will be moving into a world where we can be thriving in the pandemic as well.
Yes.
And for everyone who is messaging us and reaching out and joining us now live, whether you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, or Twitch, we'll be taking questions from the audience today. So feel free to share any of those questions on the platforms. We'll be checking that out as well. We're going to be going in just a couple minutes into our episode with Merav Yuravlivker, who is the founder of Data Society. So, we're going to be talking about what's going on in the data economy, education, transformation, COVID, track and trace, so many relevant topics right now. I'm in New York City, so many of our listeners know I'm on 42nd and 10th near the Javits Center. Last week, the USS Comfort just got sent home, so no longer
Wow.
do we have that ship, the same one that was here for 9/11. I actually walk my dog right by the Javits Center almost every day, and it's so quiet. But I think finally the numbers are coming down in New York, which is
Yeah,
a good
we're seeing
sign.
that curve go down, which is wonderful. And hopefully we'll see that trend continue.
And you're in Washington D.C. Is that right? Like you're in the
That's
D.C.
right.
area. Mm.
Yeah. So I'm right in the middle. I'm actually also close to A Center, the convention center down here in DC. And we're nowhere near as populated as New York. Um, so things have been pretty good. I'm really impressed, frankly, with the citizens of DC. Everybody's been taking it really seriously, staying home, being mindful in their communities. So it's been very heartening to see that level of care for each other.
Well, and that care is going to hopefully continue to grow and accelerate over time. I mean, there's so many initiatives happening. And so we're going to kick off today's episode to talk about some of these initiatives that we're seeing in New York, in DC, and with the data economy. So without further ado, everyone who's joining us live, again, feel free to chime in with any questions that you have in the Q&A, in the comments for any of the apps that you're on. We'll be sure to reserve some period at the end of the session for any of those questions that you have. And without further ado, we'll get it kicked off. So, welcome back to the HumAIn podcast listeners. Today, our guest speaker is Merav Yuravlivker, who is the founder and CEO of Data Society. She's a co founder of a movement in Washington, D.C. to accelerate the data economy and the next wave of the workforce. Merav, thanks for joining us on HumAIn.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we all know that we are now many weeks into what has been the unprecedented year of the century, known as the COVID-19 scenarios that we're
We're only one
experiencing.
fifth of the way through, too.
1/5 of the way through, but it feels like a lifetime. And one thing that we know that is so certain is that data has never been as important as it is today. Now, to set the stage for our episode, love for our listeners to learn a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then let's dive into the data economy.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of Data Society, and we are a data science training and consulting firm. And we work with government agencies as well as large organizations and corporate clients to help them understand their data to solve problems. So, whether that's through customizing training programs to their use cases to train up their workforce to understand data, or whether that's building customized software and algorithms to help them make predictions about trends that they're seeing. We are there to provide solutions because we know that data is only useful when it's being analyzed and when it's being looked at. And we help companies and agencies do that.
Now, it's incredible because both of us here on the show, we're both involved in the education industry as
Yes,
well
we
as,
are.
products and services. And everything's been disrupted as a result of COVID. But one of the industries that, although it's been disrupted, we've been seeing a lot of movement in is the education, the digital transformation industry. I've talked about with a few of our other hosts and guests on HumAIn that although there's been some disruption with Galvanize, we've come out ahead. We've
hmm
transformed, moved a lot into this live online model. What are some of the things that you've seen as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's been truly amazing is just the way that our team has handled the transition from more in-person trainings to more live streaming. So a really big, frankly, round of applause to them for working with our clients who've also been incredibly flexible and understanding. And what we're seeing is a lot more interest for organizations that have offices across the world for these live streaming trainings that we're offering. So, just to give you an example, one of our clients is the Inter American Development Bank, and they're here in Washington, D.C. So, typically we do in person trainings for them here, although we also deliver trainings all over the country. But since we switched to live streaming, we have a lot of students from South America who are joining us now. And it's been really wonderful to see that additional impact that's had and the different um, points of view that they're bringing to the table, and also seeing that type of collaboration between colleagues who don't normally work together. So we're seeing a lot of amazing advantages to switching to this model, and that's just one of them.
And it's incredible to see this live streaming model. I've been on a few investor pitches this week where we're seeing different startups teaching Spanish over live streaming. And
Wow.
even for many of the high school students who may be listening in or who are wanting to accelerate careers in data science or software engineering, there's one startup founder I've been following great attention with. It's
hmm
actually the founder of Fiveable, and they've been working on helping AP students get fives on their exams here in the United
Wow.
States and globally. And they have seen tens of thousands of people studying live with instructors on the
That's
platform as these
amazing.
AP exams are literally on the way of going live any day. And I remember when I was in high school, this was some of the most stressful times, but it's also incredible to see that we're starting to see more accessible and more equitable results that are possible as a result of the new modality of live online education.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Seeing how this is really going to shift the way that people think about education, and there are of course a lot of considerations. You know, we used to do full day trainings, but obviously it's very difficult for someone to sit in front of a screen and pay attention for 8 hours of a day or 7 hours of a day. So now we're chunking it into smaller portions over longer periods of time to make sure that we're maximizing that learning and that retention. So all of these little shifts and adjustments that we're making to make sure that we keep that interactivity there, keep people engaged, has been a really great addition to the content that we have.
Now, of course, learning is something that we always want to do as we're lifelong learners. But again, the phrase of the year is COVID-19, and data is very important today. I think it goes without saying that individuals like yourself and myself, a lot of our news and attention is being spent on COVID. We're seeing dashboards and analytics and reports out there every day about how are we flattening the curve? Are we
hmm
alone together? Where are the trends and diagnoses going? With things like contact tracing and test and trace and track and trace and all these different initiatives. But there's so much going on. And can you, as someone who has worked a lot with NGOs and nonprofits and institutions that are trying to understand more about this, can you share with us some insights you've been discovering in the industry?
Yeah, so, I think what you're saying is exactly right. Data is the only way that we're going to get through this successfully and make sure that we prevent it in the future. So it's really important for us to understand that data. that we're collecting about this pandemic is truly for the benefit of the entire population. And what I mean by that is when we look at the comparison between, let's say, South Korea and the United States, who both discovered their first COVID patients around the same time, South Korea really went very heavy into the data, and they instituted contact tracing, and they instituted um, diagnostic tests, at a very high level. And they were able to contain it because they could really quarantine people at a more specific level. Now, it's important to state that, of course, South Korea is a much smaller country than the United States, and it's much more isolated when you think about the borders that are around it. So they did have those advantages. But when we think about the level of testing that we need here in the United States, we're still working up to that as we're seeing. And, you know, what I'll say is that while there's a lot of politics that seems to be involved in this pandemic, it's important to understand that data is apolitical, and it's important to use it in order to inform our decisions. So when we don't have data that we're collecting on it, we're not sure what our real numbers are, right? Like I know that New York City, where you live, had to adjust their number of deaths higher in the middle of April because there were so many they weren't accounting for. These are people that died in their homes. They didn't even make it to the hospital. And we're not sure who those family member, who those individuals infected, where's that contact tracing. So not knowing that can have a huge impact. And just to give you an example, I think it's estimated that about 20% of the people who have been infected with COVID are responsible for something like 95% of cases. So we really are looking at such a contagious disease. And because it's asymptomatic, it's so important for us to be able to isolate those individuals as quickly as possible. And the only way we can do that is with the data that we're talking about. So it's really been fascinating to see the level of research that's been done on this, and I think we're going to see a lot of new insights and new protocols that will come out of it.
I think it's absolutely critical that we do proper isolation, containment, quarantine processes because another very surprising statistic that came out of New York City from Governor Cuomo was that almost 66% of hospitalizations that we're seeing today in the five boroughs are people who are not essential workers and people who are not out there on the streets.
Interesting.
It's that perhaps something is going on with cleanliness and sterilization and that these impacts as you're mentioning, maybe someone's going out to the grocery store and that essential worker at the grocery store is asymptomatic and
Yeah.
everyone's getting this condition thinking that they're safe. So, my hope is that we're able to set up better track and trace processes over time. And I think you hit it best at the start of the episode, Mirav, which is that apolitical data is what we should be thinking about unbiased data. If we can step away from all the stereotypes, we can think about how ethics and standards can help everyone together advance as an entire society so we can come out ahead from COVID 19. Of course, we're seeing all the unemployment reports and a lot of
Yeah.
statistics out here that COVID's impacted every part of the economy, but the key to understand is that data can help us identify trends and signals to then determine what does reopening look like? What does protection of different vulnerable populations look like? But I think one of the keys there that I'd love to dive deeper into is the difference between data processed from data scientists versus epidemiologists. It's often assumed that, data scientists, we have this magic secret sauce. We whip our fingers, we yell a special spell, and magically we're at 99% accuracy. But is that the truth here?
I mean, I left my magic wand in the closet, so unfortunately, I'm not going to pull it out right now. Um, I do think there is a lot of that misconception going around, and in fact, we did a study last year of data scientists and asked them what their biggest pain points were in their workforce, and what we found is that they had a lot of difficulty communicating insights to their managers and to their staff outside of their data science teams because there's not a common data vocabulary, we like to call. And we actually train executives as well as general staff because we want to be able to bridge that gap and facilitate that type of collaboration and communication. Another misconception that a lot of people have is that data science is magic, right? You push a button and all of a sudden you know exactly what's going on. And I'm sure you could also speak to how much time data collection and data cleaning actually takes, right? Usually it's 80% of any data project. And a lot of the data scientists that we surveyed said that there's a lot of frustration on the part of their bosses because they don't understand exactly how time consuming it is to collect that amount of data and then to collect it accurately and make sure that it's clean and ready for processing. Um, One thing that I will say is a key factor to any successful data analytics project is that industry knowledge. And one important factor that epidemiologists have that maybe not all data scientists have is a really deep understanding about the spreads of disease, how diseases are transmitted, what are the key factors and influences in society. And by having that knowledge, and then by building on top of that with an additional data science layer, you're really merging the best of both worlds because they will be able to pinpoint, exactly what they're looking for, and they'll be able to interpret the results in an industry specific way. So I think it's important to collaborate, but also understand, of course, that they're not the same and they're not interchangeable.
Yeah, I think that's 100% spot on because the epidemiologist knows so much more about medical and healthcare data, whether it's looking at lungs or understanding different symptoms and how they impact each other, than a
Exactly.
data scientist who takes a neural network and says, let's find a trend, right? Um, but I think another thing that you shared that was super interesting is about the data preparation, collection, and refinement stage. And we talk a lot about design thinking in both software engineering and data science. But one of the areas that a lot of Americans do not know about is if Apple and Google want to set up this fantastic idea of contact and trace where you install these apps, and we've been seeing some from MIT and now Apple and Google. Well, it doesn't work unless we get a critical mass of people to actually install the apps with their telecommunication providers and their
Yeah.
devices. If 1 million people, less than a third of a percent of the population do it, how helpful is that going to really be?
I mean, I think it could be helpful in terms of extrapolating and modeling some of that the network effects, right? So there are ways where we can do that to simulate what that could look like on a larger population. I will say, and this is just from my personal standpoint about data privacy, there are some very valid concerns that have come up, right? People do not want to be tracked by a company without getting certain assurances about how their data will be used. And so it's really important that any app that is released and is supposed to be used by a majority of people in the population, it is very important for us to understand what the data privacy policy is, how our data will be used. Is it going to be kept on servers for years and years and years? Will it be discarded after 30 days? Will it be appropriately anonymized? Because, you know, there are people that, we do have a right to privacy, and there's a lot of information that's already collected on us as is. So I think that aspect needs to be addressed, and I'm sure that leads to some hesitation by people who want to participate in the contact tracing program, but potentially are unsure about what that will lead to in the future in terms of their own privacy.
I mean, some of the hesitancies I can see there is from a new show that's been on air the last couple of weeks. For anyone who's been Netflixing and chilling, there's of course always Hulu and chill and Amazon Prime and chill. And there's been the show Uploads, which is all about this future world where you're living and you have no spoilers here at all, but this digital avatar presence or
That's
digital
right.
twin, let's call it. And what's super interesting is they have this scene where someone puts on privacy mode, but then it's not really a privacy mode. So,
That's right.
I think that's what we think a lot about here today. And you should definitely check out the show if you're a listener here. They're short episodes, but they're so futuristic. It's very much about where the world could be. But like let's ground down into reality where we are today. I mean, I know at Data Society you're working on some phenomenal projects, and you
Hmm.
have some new initiatives, a new partnership as well that you wanted to announce today. So let's hear what you've been up to.
Absolutely. So Data Society, of course, we are focused on helping people, and that's usually helping people with their careers, helping organizations operate more effectively. But obviously, when COVID hit, we saw that this was going to be a massive issue. And we wanted to figure out what the best way would be for us to be able to contribute. And I had an experience recently. I mean, now it's a little while back, where I went into a grocery store and I could only find about half of the products that I was searching for. And I realized that, I'm sure you've experienced this as well. There's no way to know what's going to be at the grocery store until you get there. And right now, on demand delivery services, of course, they are pricier than usual and it also can take several days. So there's a lot of different implications as to why I wanted to go to the grocery store by myself. And I thought, well, what if we could connect with data inventories from grocery stores and then build an app to be able to share that information with shoppers so that they can check the supplies before they go. And that way they'll only have to make one trip because the other concern is that the more trips you make outside, the more exposure you have to COVID. So our aim is to reduce that so you only have to go out one time to get the essential products that you need. And what we found out very quickly is that groceries had their hands full already, and a lot of them don't have up to date inventory APIs, for example, that we could tap into. So we ended up partnering with another local Washington, D.C. company called R Streets, and they've built an app called R Street Supplies, which helps people find out what's in stock at a grocery store near them. And it's a crowdsourcing app for now. So, just as you correctly noted earlier with contact tracing, it's only useful when people are reporting what's in stock. And you can go and you can see, okay, if I want to go to the grocery store, um, what's been reported to be in stock, and that way I know where to go. So right now, we are using their data to do some descriptive statistics, and then we'll be going on to some predictive analytics if when we get enough data to do so. So we're really excited to be able to help people understand what are the trends, when is this most likely to run out, if this store isn't close to you, or if this store close to you doesn't have the supplies that you need, are there other stores within a 1 mile radius that do have the products that you need? Can we recommend that to you? So we're really excited to partner with them and bring in our data analytics expertise to help support their application.
I think this is such a thrilling idea because, as someone who's a New Yorker, I host weekly dinner parties with a lot of colleagues, and everyone tells me this store is out of chicken, this store is out of flour, this store is out of toilet paper. And the only way that people discover what's real is actually by asking your friends, oh, I went this week to Trader Joe's, they had it, or I went to this specialty store on this corner and this avenue. But you no longer can call the stores. You can't even go on the websites often. So I think this is a fantastic solution that you're working on to find out, is there the toilet paper and is there the goods?
Exactly.
Well, thinking of solutions, this is one solution talking about COVID for good and how we can use data to help empower supply chains, which I think is one of the biggest industries that we've seen a lot of disruption, but also a lot of opportunity to digitally transform during the past year. I think there's a lot more that's happening beyond the supply chains. Of course, the educational tech industry, where we both have our hearts near and dear, as
Yes.
well as the healthcare industry. I wanted to talk a little about the educational industry. We have, for many of our listeners who are listening live or on the recording, here we are, in May, and the monthly jobs report for unemployment recently came out. With a numbers at least 20 plus million in
That's right.
April, another 5 to 10 million in May, and what was so interesting is when I was reading the report, it was saying something that about 80% of these workers, which is so shocking, I think, and surprising, the statistic that about 80% of them today have not actually been laid off. They've been furloughed, which is a phrase that many Americans don't even know what it means. Like, what is furloughed? Has that even happened in modern history? Like, what does that mean? Can you share some of your thoughts on furloughed workers, the ed tech industry, and what opportunity that can present to many of us?
Yeah. So furloughed workers are workers that are still technically employed by companies but are not receiving paychecks. And what's really unique in this situation is previously, when employees were furloughed, they were not eligible for unemployment insurance. But because many companies are anticipating this to be a short crunch as opposed to a long lasting effect, they don't want to lose some of their employees by letting them go too soon. So they're furloughing them, and, in the hopes to bring them back, assuming that the economy can go in the direction that we want it to. And the government has now stated, hey, anybody who has been furloughed is eligible for unemployment insurance. And what's really good as well about furloughing is they still have access to their health insurance, which is critical, especially at this time. But we're seeing a lot of people who are kind of sitting at home, quarantining, and figuring out, well, what do I do now? Um, Now, what's interesting, I read another statistic showing that about 77% of furloughed workers anticipate going back to work. And I hope that that is true, but we are also anticipating, I know Airbnb and Uber, I think, just said they are laying off about 10-15% of their workforce. And what do we do with the individuals who are now need to think about another career transition? And one of the longer term initiatives that my company is working on is helping prepare those individuals to um, re-enter the workforce with very highly prized data analytics skills. So working through the Department of Labor, for example, or through local governments with job force training, workforce training programs that can help revitalize individuals and again bring that industry knowledge that they already have and have taken years to learn, and then pair it with that data analytics skill set to create something completely new and helps them become more agile in this environment. So that's absolutely something that we're anticipating and preparing for now so that we can, again, support these individuals as they transition.
I think that's so important. And if you're anyone listening to the show who has either been laid off or furloughed, this is literally the best opportunity to learn new skills and to digitally transform. And of course, it may not be the first thing on your mind because, of course, you're thinking about, bills and your livelihood and your family. And I want to encourage everyone who's listening to see how you can start making that pathway to digital transformation, whether that's working with an organization like Data Society where they operate, or Galvanize at our campuses, remote, live online as well. I think it's incredible that we've been seeing some statistics from the government that of the most recent CARES Act package, this was about $300 billion that was passed, about 1% of that, or almost 300 million American dollars, was allocated to workforce initiatives. That means to
Yes.
cities like New York City, San Francisco, Washington, D.C. And, of course, that's a trickle down effect. It means different areas get different funding, but that's to help both employers retain their workers through maybe furloughed analyst programs, and for consumers like yourselves who are listening to reach out to your local small business administration or your local training workforce centers to see what can you learn to continue accelerating your career path.
Exactly. And I want to reiterate on a point that you mentioned, David, which is not to feel pressure to immediately dive in and try to do training 8 hours a day. It's an incredibly stressful period for everyone. And so it's really important to take care of your mental health first and make sure that you're feeling all right. You're doing what you need to do to stay healthy because I know there's a lot of expectations right now, like, oh, I'm home. There's so many things that I can do. And I think it's important to note sometimes it's okay to, as you said, Netflix and chill or Amazon Prime and chill. Um, go for a walk, spend time with family, and find ways to take care of your mental health. Because I think, again, that's an issue that we are going to see much more information about moving forward. And it's one that we at Data Society are mindful of as well.
I think one of the keys that you just hit on so well, Marav, is that we need to think about mental health, physical health, and all health in general. And one of the best things you can do during COVID-19 is setting up consistent patterns in your life or consistent habits. When you would go to the office, you had a routine, and that routine kept you very good, whether that's, on your way to work, on the way home from work, or at your living place.
Hmm.
But now a lot of people, we can't go to gyms. We don't have the opportunity to, go to parks. And that's transforming life into a digital only society. So it's so
Yeah.
important that when you're remote, you're able to call a friend or do a remote yoga class, do a remote fitness class. I mean, I've picked up the Insanity and P90X Beachbody workouts
Nice.
that I haven't picked up
Those are
since the
intense.
early, so intense. And I haven't picked them up since the early 2010s, right? So it's been a long time going to gyms and in-person experiences. But I have been consistent with it. I've been doing it now for almost 6 weeks every day.
Wow.
So it's definitely,
Are you
I
noticing
will,
a difference?
well, I'll tell you, when you go to college, you think of the freshman 15, you put on 15 pounds. I might be a COVID negative 15 if I keep up with this. And
Wow.
I hope that for everyone, and I think it's possible, and, I'm even, by the next time some of you see me, I might even have a different hair color going that far to try new things out. So I encourage people, for your mental health, try out things. Be willing to be creative because now is that right time. And whether that's just giving you the space to get into the creative arts and cook or whatever you need to do. Um, One of the best things that I heard when I was watching the season finale of Westworld, there was this
Oh,
great
no
ad on
spoilers.
before. No spoilers about Westworld. This is just a plug there for the futuristic thing. But it's that uh, there was this ad from HBO that said, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
Like right now, it's okay not to be okay and to acknowledge that and to talk to your friends and family about that. It's so important for mental health.
Yeah, and that's I think a really important point as well. It's really okay to not be okay. You can be sad, you can cry, you can get angry. It's important to experience those feelings and express them in a healthy way.
And, we're expressing feelings. We're getting very emotional with each other here on air. But beyond that, it's also important to express what work looks like because now in this time, whether you're one of those 30 million Americans or more that have been impacted by layoffs or furloughs, you might be considering what does the future of work look like for myself? Or if you're a founder or an executive, what does the future work look like for my company or organization? And I want us to dive a little bit deeper into both of those topics so we can see whether some of the predictions, trends that Merav and myself were thinking about. Let's start on the individual. I think that's, again, very important, thinking about each and every person. We've talked about these workforce programs that we think will be up and coming throughout the entire
Hmm.
United States over the next couple of years. Um, what are some of the predictions that you might be seeing around jobs or industry shifts that you're seeing some early signs that you would encourage people to get on that bandwagon?
Well, I think one of the first signs is that real estate, commercial real estate, is going to shift dramatically over the next few years. We've already heard from some very large companies that they're not planning on their workforce coming back into the office through the summer, some even until 2021. And because they're not seeing a drop in productivity, now there's a lot of questions asking, well, how can we use those dollars better? Does it make sense to have offices? Um, I do think, speaking for myself and speaking to my team as well, we miss being in an office. We enjoy having that type of casual communication that comes out of it. And I think it's very difficult to know what we're missing out on when we're not in the office. So even though the levels of productivity might be the same, there's a lot of intangibles that are very hard to measure that encourage innovation and collaboration that really only occurs in an office space. But I do think there's going to be a lot more work from home jobs moving forward. And I also think there's going to be a big shift towards data literacy. And what I mean by that is an understanding of how to ask the right questions of data, um, understanding what the terminology means, what the potential means, and feeling comfortable to manipulate data, visualize data to a certain extent. And the reason why I think that is because, as we're seeing, it's becoming more important to leverage data on a day to day basis. And this pandemic has really accelerated that. And we're seeing a lot of companies and organizations that we're speaking to who are now thinking through what it would take to train up their workforce in even that base level. So when we're thinking about additional job opportunities, again, there are a lot of areas um, that are now going to be opening up with a focus on data analytics. We're seeing healthcare. I think there's going to be a lot of health insurance companies that will be expanding. Zoom obviously is doing quite well, so I think we're going to see a boom of that type of live streaming technology. I had a really great conversation with a friend of mine yesterday who was talking about how AR, not VR, but AR, augmented reality, is going to become more ingrained in our lifestyles because it's like Pokemon Go, right? It kind of fit in a lot more easily than having a VR headset. So we're going to see a trend, I think, towards that. And towards robots delivering our food. Again, that's something that's already happening in test trials across the US. And so we're going to see some little robots that are running around on sidewalks, deliver with our pizzas inside and stuff like that. So I think we're going to see that type of shift, and we're going to see a lot more jobs in that type of automated behavior.
I love the scenarios and the simulations that you just explained here, Marav, because AR and VR definitely is having a coming of age moment.
Hmm.
We talk back to the new Amazon blockbuster show Upload. Again, no spoilers here, but there's a lot of AR and VR in the show. And the use cases are so practical. They are things that once you watch them in the show, you could say, oh, yeah, we don't know exactly the timeline. Is that next year? Is that in 5 or 10 years? But once it gets there, wow, these are so practical. I want this in my life. So I definitely think we can be moving more towards this augmented and virtual experiences. Absolutely, as well, the healthcare industry is going to go through a tremendous acceleration of digital transformation and growth, especially with service. My sister has actually worked a lot in the service industry, predominantly with insurance companies, and is now, embarking on a new journey as well with a healthcare company, one of the largest out there, and
Yeah.
they are going through tremendous growth at this time. And I think it's not just for this time. I think as populations age, as we move into infrastructure
Hmm.
where health becomes ever more important to track and trace, it's an industry I see no signs of slowing down. You know, Beyond thinking of, as you've shared, those industries, including healthcare, I think as someone who looks at products and startups every week, the industries that I see accelerating beyond healthcare, beyond education, include D2C, which means direct to consumer. So any
Hmm.
products that are, you go on Amazon or online and you buy this product so you can use it at your home or your work from home area, I think that's going to accelerate. So that could be wearables. That could be, a home hair kit to get hair coloring. That could be a home shaving kit. That could be anything in that space. I think is going to accelerate. I think any products that do enable work from home, just like you shared, you see that trend into mid 2020, maybe even mid late 2021, 2022. Who knows where it's going to go? But I mean, everyone's going to need maybe two monitors at their houses, and they're going to need all these light kits and green screens. I mean, the whole industries are going to accelerate to build these fantastic work from home experiences, accelerated by companies and their innovation departments. So I think we're going to see a lot there as well. I'm most excited about direct to consumer because I think
Hmm.
that's something that startups have always been trying to accelerate. We've seen it over the years with even traditional products like Casper and Brooklinen, but now we're going to see it more with other tech products.
Yeah, and I'll just add on there. I think a huge shift is going to be conferences. That's not something we address specifically, but I'm sure you've seen there were many conferences we're planning on attending this year. Obviously, they got canceled. And now the question is, who's going to be the big player in the space for virtual conferences? And what will that look like? Because a big advantage is not only being able to travel to a different city, but also meeting other individuals in that industry. And whoever can capture that market first, I think, is going to see quite a bit of growth, because what we're seeing is that any big events, concerts, conferences, family gatherings, those will not be back to normal, I think, before mid 2021 at the earliest. And what is the next year going to look like for those types of events?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to attend the New York Tech Meetup, which normally is in person with hundreds of people. In fact, it's the largest meetup in the world. Sometimes there's
Wow.
even 2 to 5,000 people for their annual event. And they just did an online event using some new platforms. I think they're all really interesting. The technology is still very beta. I think a lot of companies are accelerating these remote conferences. But I think you're right. That's going to be a very exciting space to help with collaboration, networking, and so forth. I think beyond that, with conferencing as well, we're gonna see like what does a remote experience look like. We hear about Zoom fatigue, people getting tired. So, is there gonna be new mental health tech out there to help people recover? Whether those are traditional tech products like Calm and Headspace, or other
Yeah,
new wearables or injectables, or who knows what those products look like. But I think that's going to be ever more important. We've seen the acceleration of live streaming, as you've shared about, Merav, at the start of today's show, not just in education, but with streaming games like Fortnite, and of course, other ones like Apex Legends, and all these new games out there where people are having competitions online live. I mean, we've seen even how Magnus Carlsen, the grandmaster
mm-hmm.
in chess today, has partnered with the chess tournaments to do live online AI, supervised chess tournaments to make sure no one's cheating, but then they get money and prizes. Even now, the AP exams are going online. GMAT's going online. I
Yeah.
mean, we're seeing how it's all happening. So we could be having, I suspect, a coming of age for digital transformation as a whole.
Absolutely.
And tying that all in together, I mean, when we think about education and digital transformation, both of us were, in the industry around product and education. But one of the questions I'm always asked by someone new into tech and digital transformation is, how do I get started? Am I, as an individual contributor, the decision maker? If I'm a mid-level manager, if I'm the C-suite executive, where does that happen for an organization to make the shift? If today they're saying, you know what, we got to make some decisions, but where does it start?
That's a great question, and that's one that we help a lot of our clients answer. The first thing I'll say is that it's becoming more imperative now more than ever for companies to make that shift to become more data informed. I think the way that companies are behaving now is really going to inform their trajectory over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And if you're not starting to plan for this data economy that we're in, it will be like competing. In a race when you're in a rowboat and your competitors are in motorboats. You'll get there eventually, maybe, but you're probably going to spring a lot of leaks. And you're definitely not going to be ahead of that pack. So the question is how to transform from that rowboat and get that motorboat, right? And a lot of that has to do with the ability for an organization to be agile and to empower its workforce to think independently, to ask the right questions, and to be able to solve challenges effectively. So, as somebody who might be a manager, director in the C suite, it always starts from the top. It's so important to have a data champion in any organization who can really provide that mandate to their employees and set that culture and say, hey, this is something we're investing in. If you come to me with a recommendation, you need to show me the data behind it. You need to be able to prove that you've done your research. So it's not just a gut feeling, but it's also proven by the trends that you're seeing, the statistics that you're seeing. And we love training up our executives and our directors, because when we empower them with the right language, with the knowledge of the tools that are out there, with the understanding of how to hire and how to build a data science team, they get very excited. And we see that starting from that top, all of a sudden they want to talk to their data scientists. They want to provide the resources to get new tools and to provide training programs. And so, starting at that level, training up your executives and your managers, and then training up a general staff, even a 1 day workshop of why is data important? How can we use it? How can you as an individual contribute to that? It can help people understand why you don't want to have 100 Excel spreadsheets that live on your computer alone that don't have any references to anything else, right? So being able to think through how you want to collect data effectively, and then taking a subset of those individuals and helping them go to the next level and get those data analysis skills so that they can find the answers to the questions that everybody else is asking. And when you're looking at that type of a collaborative environment, that also enables, by the way, the data science team to focus on what they love doing, which is building complex algorithms and solving those difficult problems, not necessarily cleaning data. I think you're going to see a huge shift in the way that a company and organization operates. I mean, if we just look at the data, organizations that are more data informed, that translates to a difference of about 3 to 5% in terms of their bottom line, in terms of increased revenue, which is huge when you're talking about tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars every year. So I think we're going to see a lot of companies that are going to take that initiative now are really going to thrive once this pandemic dies down. And so I mean, you can tell I'm very excited about it because I really am passionate about transforming the way that an organization runs, or even that an industry runs, right? And when we give people the opportunity to solve these types of problems on their own, we just see so much innovation, so much excitement, and ultimately it translates to benefits for all of us across the board. Just to give you an example, when we are doing our programs within HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, each student has a capstone project that's a direct problem that they've identified they want to solve. And we've seen our students be able to identify, what are comorbidities across different diseases based on different pills that they've been taking, medications. We've had one of our students who took a 40-hour manual task of sorting through grant applications and translating it into a 15-minute task using text mining to automatically sort them. And you're looking at that level, they're working hard to serve their constituents better. And I'm just seeing so much that we can unlock when we give people the right tools.
Yeah, I completely agree there. Both of us being in the education space, I also run some of our data science for executive and manager workshops. And I will say that for companies that go for these executive workshops to help their managers and their executives get aligned for the buy in and for the vision and the communication of data literacy, it's at least a 10-to-1 success rate for these companies versus the
Absolutely.
others. I mean, it's night and day. So I think it's critical. If you are definitely an executive or leader listening here on the show today, definitely consider one of those for your departments to gain some of that knowledge to lead with a good data strategy. Tying all this in together, Mirav, we've talked about so many topics today around successfully transforming for the next wave of the workforce, accelerating the data economy. What's a call to action that you have for our listeners today?
I think, first call to action, if you are in a company and you are anticipating these transitions, of course, you can always reach out to me, Merav at datasociety.com. That's, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, happy to help. I think the other call to action is to take an inventory of where you are currently, right? So assess what data tools do you have? How is your data stored? How is it stored securely? And then thinking through your workforce, who are your powerhouses? Who are your people that really are leveraging data? And how well is it understood in terms of data governance and data policies? So trying to take stock and inventory and understanding what your goals are. So, it's it's very difficult to say, okay, by this time next year, everything's going to be running on AI, and I'm only going to have people that understand how to use Python to build neural networks, right? That's a huge, huge lift if you're going without a database that's established and that's concrete, right? So I think you really have to take it in phases, and the first phase is to assess where you are, and then see who else on your leadership team you can get for buy-in for this type of a transformation. And I'm sure you've seen this as well in your work, but anytime that you can highlight a successful project that's used data, so if you're working on a team that used data to do something awesome, shout it from the rooftops in your company. That typically gets a lot of traction. It's a great way to show recognition to the people who are using these types of skills, and show other people that are working around them, hey, maybe I can use data too to solve this other problem that I'm having. So really making it a shared workspace for success is a great way to do it. And if you're an individual, I absolutely think you should take a look at what resources are available to you, especially if you are currently furloughed and you're thinking about what's the next stage for you. Just like learning a new language, there's not a downside to learning a bit of programming, learning a little bit more about data, because it will always come in handy. There's data is now just used everywhere. So really taking those first steps, I think, is a great idea.
Merav Yuravlivker, CEO and co-founder of Data Society. Thank you for joining us on HumAIn.
Thank you very much, David.
And for everyone who's joining us live, we are going to take some Q&A from the audience. So whether you're joining us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Periscope, or Twitch, feel free to chime in any of your questions. We'd be glad to answer them on air for the next few minutes. So please chime in. We'll be monitoring those as well. And while we wait to see what questions may come in, I think one thing I'm thinking about, we were talking about offline before this, is now there's snow in the Northeast
Oh
in
my
May.
gosh. I think, 2020 is just, it's piling a lot on, I think. So yeah, I'm going to definitely, good day to stay indoors, I think, this, at least tomorrow, Saturday. Avoid
Every
that polar vortex.
At this point, basically everything is unprecedented, right? But I think there's always going to be some new changes that we'll see. I think one thing that I'm looking forward to uh, is restaurants reopening. Quite honestly, like
Yeah.
whether it's just getting takeout, I have some of my favorite restaurants in New York that have been closed that I want to support. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see some of that reopening soon.
And I've been reading actually about that recently, that the next phase is to open outside outdoor restaurants and outdoor spaces. So, because, indoors, with air recirculating, it's actually much more likely that if somebody in their restaurant has COVID, that you're going to catch it. But outdoors, you're really lowering the risk tremendously. So I think we're going to start to see some European style cafes and restaurants come in, which will be nice. It'll be nice to see that level.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I saw some articles that showed some places in Europe that are doing exactly that. They've basically created social distancing outside with the
Hmm.
tables, and you can get the full dining experience. And hey, summer weather's coming, so why not? It should be hopefully a good experience. Well, with that, I noticed there's a couple questions coming in from the audience, so let's definitely chime in on those. One question we have coming in here from Charles is about talking about data science and talking about protecting privacy with all these tools. What can I think about today? How can I learn about, implementing data privacy with data science?
uh, well, the best way to do that is not using anything on the internet, if we're being 100% honest. I think what you have to assume is anything you're doing online can be tracked. But what you can do is try to avoid cookies, which are little trackers that are in your web browser that identify who you are and can track your behavior. So, just to give you an example, Facebook, I'm sure you've had the experience where you've talked about something, you've searched for something online, and literally next time you log on to Facebook, there's an ad for the exact thing that you were looking at or something very similar. Um, Facebook does track your activity when you're not on their site. So you can actually go into the settings of the profile and you can see there's a section called off Facebook activity, and you can go in and you can turn that activity off, and you're telling them don't follow me when I leave the platform. So it's important to be aware of these types of trackers that you use in your popular software and try to actively diminish the ability for them to track you. So what I would recommend is, if that is something that concerns you, go to some of the most popular apps that you're using, sites, and see if in your privacy settings you have an ability to control that, to make sure you're saying, I don't want cookies installed. I don't want you to know where I've been in the past hour. And then, just keeping an eye out on that. I think we're seeing a lot more of those features come into play, especially after the GDPR, which is the Data Protection Act in Europe, came through. That is really forcing companies to take more and more responsibility about how they're using their data. Also, if you have an Alexa, if you have a Google voice in your house, maybe turn it off if you're having a conversation that you don't really want Google to listen to, or Amazon to listen to. These are just some precautions that you can take to try to ensure some of that privacy.
Sure. And I would definitely add that, as data does look to be more privacy focused, whether that's about the data that's being collected or the data that you're letting be collected from you, definitely consider if you have an app that breaks next time when you enable all these amazing ad blockers, consider you might have to disable that. I remember the other day I was on even just a simple Google Meet, one of these sharing video conference tools from Google, and the colleague I was on just could not share their screen. And we were going through it, and I said, you know what? I'm just curious. Do you have any ad blockers or cookies on? And then they told me that they were running in the Brave browser. They switched to Chrome, and like magic, it worked. So it's
Wow.
super interesting there, absolutely. Well, this has been a delightful conversation where hopefully we've shared some education, some inspiration, some insights for everyone from our audience who are joining us live or on playback. We'll check out on the comments on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Periscope, or Twitch to give you any other insights. Appreciate everyone for joining. And Merav, thanks so much for joining us today on HumAIn.
Thank you very much, David. It's been a pleasure.
Everyone, thank you. Everyone, please be safe and stay healthy.